Welcome to Booktopia TV. I'm John Purcell, and I'm here with Claire Wright, who has just won the Stella Prize with her history, The Forgotten Rebels of Eureka. Welcome, Claire.
Thanks very much.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
I was at the award ceremony last night. It was a wonderful feeling in the room. I want to just ask you a few questions about the Stella. Why do we need the Stella Prize?
Well, I think that it's just fantastic to have another prize on the literary horizon, whatever that prize is for, whether it's for women or chipmunks or tennis rackets. For me, just having any recognition of Australian writing is fantastic. I guess there is a more serious element to it, being disingenuous to talk about the chipmunks, because there is empirically less coverage of women's writing in Australia. Women's writing gets less attention, less reviews in our newspapers and magazines, fewer women are used as reviewers, and I guess more broadly you could say that stories about women and that might interest female readers are also less likely to get coverage. And so I guess what the Stellas does is that it gives more visibility and some prominence and an extra mark of esteem and a little touch of glamour as well to the idea that Australian women have something really terrific to contribute to the Australian literary culture.
I was very pleased last night when I heard that you've been working on the book for so long. Was it 10 years?
10-year project.
It's very nice to finish the project and be given an award for doing so.
I know. I mean, you don't write books to win awards. That's if you started out with that in mind, you'd just be a basket case the whole way, because you can't be looking over your shoulder in any respect when you write. I started this book because I had a burning desire to find out answers to questions that I felt hadn't been put to our history before. And I wanted to go right back to the sources and to write this history from the ground up. And when you do that, and it is a work of scholarship in that way, and I am an academic historian, that's my background. When you go back to the primary sources, when you dig as deep as I have, it takes a long time. It's just a long, painstaking process. So I loved every minute of it. It was a long project. To come to the end of it, to have been shortlisted for the Stella, to even to be longlisted for the Stella, was absolutely threw me over the moon, and actually to emerge as the winner is beyond any of my wildest hopes or expectations.
The speech you gave last night was I found very interesting and moving. And then Carrie Tiffany last year gave 10% of her award away to the shortlisters, and this year they're getting a prize themselves. And you then announced to the world that you're going to be giving as part of your winnings to who was it you're going to give it to?
There are two causes that I felt really need to have what they do brought into more prominence, and it was a good way for me to give back a bit. So 10% of my award is going to be split between these two organisations, which are the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, which struggles valiantly to address the disparity between educational outcomes between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people in this country. So $2,500 will go to buy 20 early literacy packs that gets books into the hands of babies and young children and mothers in remote Indigenous communities. And the second part of my contribution will go to my local public high school, which is Northcote High School in Melbourne, and it will go to fund an annual academic award that will be called the Eureka Prize for Women's History. Again, I think that the teachers in the public school system work so hard to give our kids the great education that everybody deserves, and they often do it against the odds, and I think this is a way for me to give back to the education system that I came through, and it's also a way to raise within the curriculum a bit of prominence to women's issues as well. So the prize will go to a project by a school student of any year level across all disciplines that draws attention to the experiences of women in the past.
So pretty much what we're saying here is, apart from the generous donations, is that going through the public school can produce academics and prize winners as well? Is that a big stamp for the public school system?
Well, of course it can. You know, we should be very proud of our democratic traditions, but we should also see that they come from a very strong base that is about civic responsibility, and I think that it breeds really interesting thinkers who think outside the square. Our public school systems are full of innovative, creative, hardworking people, and they deserve more support.
So, why were they forgotten? Like, I don't want to read the book, but in a sort of a soundbite version of it, what are the reasons why the women were forgotten?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons why women haven't been written into this story in the past. If we take it right back to the event itself, the Eureka Uprising was something that nobody had planned. It wasn't an armed rebellion. It was actually a response to the situation that had gotten really out of hand by the end of 1854. Events were unfolding very quickly, and the whole community was really drawn into it, including the women, and there were women within the stockade. There was a woman killed in the what was called at the time the Ballarat Massacre, and later became known as the Eureka Stockade. I think very quickly everybody wanted to drop it from view. The government certainly did, because they had sent forces in to fire on a civilian population that they knew included women and children. And of course that's not something that is great for government PR. The men of Ballarat, the miners who had been involved in the rebellious actions that were going on, they didn't want to draw attention to it either, because these were already men who were very disappointed, who felt impotent about their roles here on the goldfields. They felt aggrieved, they felt like they didn't have a voice. This is why they needed political rights in the first place. And so for men who were already really very down on their luck, the fact that they hadn't been able to protect even wives and children was something they didn't want to draw attention to. And so people really afterwards just want to get on with the business. You'll see that the last chapter of the book is called A Day at the Races, and really within a couple of days of the stockade happening and all of these people, over 30 people getting killed, life was getting back to normal. People were picking up their picks and shovels again, digging for gold, and a race meeting was held, a Christmas race meet. And then very quickly the miners really received much of what they had been fighting for. They got the right to vote, men did anyway, and they were able to access land, they were able to have a participation in government that they hadn't been able to before. Then by the end of the 19th century, when people really had the time to look back and reflect on the actions of their earlier lives, they've built their families and their fortunes, they're now living in settled cities, they're not on the frontier anymore. They start to write the story of Eureka, and it's written as the legend of the gold rush era, which is very much looked upon as being this time where men went off into the bush on adventures, searching for gold, these incredible opportunities, and women are written out of that story because it wasn't part of the image of nation building, that it wasn't part of that imagery of nation building that people wanted, and women knew that they were being left out of that story, out of that national narrative. And women wrote to the papers and they said, hey, we were there too, this is our story, these are our achievements, this is our legacy as well. But those voices were silenced, and then as the 20th century went on, and event after event, particularly the First World War came along, and again the idea of the birth of the nation, in a way it was a second birth of the nation, the birth of democracy at Eureka, the birth of the nation at Gallipoli, became seen as entirely masculine events, and the military nature of the birth of the nation at World War I cast a notion back that the Eureka movement was a quasi-military one as well, whereas it wasn't at all. It was a community uprising. It was a very mixed community of men and women who were fighting for their neighbourhood, their local rights. And so I think that over the course of the 20th century, wave upon wave of historians took up the story of Eureka as being this key foundational moment, but by this time women's presence had been erased from the picture.
I love when books like this come out, because I think that keeping the story of the rise of democracy and the struggles to get to be part of a democratic nation are so important especially in times, especially since September 11, with sort of the changes in people's rights and freedoms, slowly sort of being whittled away. A lot of the hard-won rights that we've had and we've always held, we're willing to exchange it for a bit of safety, and that door opening has now allowed, I suppose, more commercial interests to sort of push their interests into it and saying, you know, I'll give you this if you give me this freedom. The picture you're drawing, though, is even, I think, more enlightening and more helpful because it is closer to what we're experiencing now. It is more of, you know, as you said, it's a community, and what we have here is we have far more equality and far more people rising up together. When you look at the marches, you don't see all men. You see women, children as well,
or the
families.
Occupy movement.
Yeah,
or things like that, yeah.
There's far more equality to it. Was that part of when you chose that point in history? Was it an interest in that beginnings of democracy that led you there?
To me, I've been really interested in the way that men and women have historically shared space. My first book, Beyond the Ladies' Lounge, was about women who had been publicans in Australia, and again that was seen as a place, an iconic place in Australia that was an exclusively masculine domain, the pub. But actually the actual empirical fact is that women were largely the people who ran the hotel industry, and people who have any knowledge of pubs, and particularly country pubs or have family connections, know that women are part of that picture and that women have shared that space. I was interested in looking at this landscape, this early gold rush period, because what I knew about it was that it was a time where everything was up for grabs. You know, we often think of the gold rush as being this topsy-turvy time. And so rather than seeing this as being a time of separate spheres, of women as the homemakers and men as taking a role in public life, I wanted to see if that was one of the things also that was broken open in this topsy-turvy time. And indeed that's what the sources were telling me, that women saw this as being a chance for their freedom and their independence as well. So it's not that these concepts like freedom and independence and equality that we have attached to Eureka are defunct or that they're apocryphal. It's actually that women too had a stake in those things, both for their families and their communities, but then for themselves personally as well. And many women wrote back to England or to Ireland and Scotland and said, you'd be mad to stay at home growing potatoes when you can come out and be independent. That there's nobody chalking out your path in life. You can make what you want of yourself here. You can create a new identity. So that was happening on an individual scale, but it was also happening on a social scale and a political scale. People who had been reformers, political activists and social reformers in the old world were coming to Australia as a way of seeing this as being, Victoria was like a tabula rasa on which they could write their ideals anew, because it was a fresh start.
Yeah.
And so gold was the ticket to that in a way. It wasn't just personal wealth they were looking for, it was what gold represented symbolically in terms of the independence and the freedom to make your own life up. And so that included women who'd been political campaigners in the old country for women's rights in particular, for democratic rights, for chartist rights. These people came out as well, and many of them were working together. They were young idealistic couples who were looking to change the structures of society and the hierarchies of power. I think this is something that we much more associate, not necessarily with our own age, but say the 1960s, the kind of, the hippie or the Bob Dylan generation. I often thought when I was researching this book of Bob Dylan's book, The Times Are A-Changing, get out of the old road if you can't lend a hand, for the times they are a-changing. I felt this very much was the situation here in Ballarat, and so what I think is really interesting about building a picture of this society that includes all of the players is that it's a much more rich and complex society, but in a funny way it's one that resembles our own more than we might like to think.
Yeah. I mean, considering these moments in time, these moments in history where there seems to be that burst of freedom, I got a sense of what you were talking about when I was reading Henry Hannah Richardson's Fortunes of Richard Marnie.
Absolutely.
The whole family, the dynamic that was in there, and the reliance on each other, and a much greater equality in that description.
That's right.
And than you see in other fiction and other storytelling. And also, I find the 19th century in England quite exciting, because
Yes.
that is really where, especially the early part, where these big struggles are starting to begin.
Yes.
And England sent a lot of those guys to Australia, so you ended up with whole families of people dissatisfied over there being sent here, which is no wonder you end up with that representation of the Australian digger as not being able to cope with rules and regulations and order and hierarchy when they go over back to England.
That's right. But the unfortunate thing is that the actuality, the authenticity of that experience that you're saying there becomes overlaid with a kind of Hollywood-style Wild West Deadwood imagery of the frontier, of being, the place where someone walks into and it's all men sitting around and the only woman you'll see is the whore over in the corner. And I think that becomes part of our popular consciousness of what this era looks like, of what the frontier looks like, and that is so far from the truth. I hope what readers will see when they come to this book is that the reason to read it is not because it's good for you. There are lessons to be learnt from this history, but it's not homework. It's not like Brussels sprouts where you eat them because you know they're going to be good for you, but they're going to taste rotten. And this is an enjoyable experience, and I've written it to be a page turner and to be a gripping narrative. It's a rollicking yarn, and the reason why it's entertaining is because the period itself was so rich, was so energetic, was so full of life, was so full of the ups and downs of fortunes made and lost. Death and life were absolutely wrapped up in everyday experiences. There's some very gory details of what it was like to have a baby on the frontier, written from the inquest documents of women who died in childbirth. It's just, the fact that you could get potted pheasant and Havana cigars and French cheeses at the tent stores in Ballarat, but at the same time most people didn't have enough money to buy an egg, that you could buy breast pumps on the goldfields, that you could buy baby clothes. These are all details that give us a sense of immersion in the times that I was lucky enough to experience over 10 years living in the archives, of being a kind of time traveller back to 1854. And I think what readers tell me is that they get some of that sense as well, and that it's actually a really pleasurable experience. And I guess what for me has been very heartening and rewarding about getting the Stella Prize is that I feel like the writing of the book has been rewarded as well as just what I have to say.
Thank you very much for talking with us, Claire. It's been wonderful. I certainly could talk to you for hours, actually.
Believe me, so could I.
It's great. The Forgotten Rebels of Eureka is available from booktopia.com.au right now.